Hi. How's everyone holding up?
I'm kind of sick, but
Good.
it's fine.
Pretty good.
Really busy though, yeah.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, like, with everything going on, I just feel very aware of how, like, irrational the world is right now. And I was thinking about, like, what it takes for people to act on their knowledge. And I was wondering, like, if you guys have any ideas on that. Like, what does it take for people to act on their knowledge?
You know, I kind of think this is similar to what Plato describes in the Republic. I mean, look at how interconnected and dependent our society is. You take things that we take for granted, like the food supply chain and medical supplies, and they're so important now, but we barely realize them at other points in time.
I think that at some point, though, it's more about what political system people live in than it is about what the individual knows. Like, if humans aren't naturally rational, what's going to enforce unified behavior?
I'm not sure I totally understand what you're saying.
Maybe it takes authoritarian government in order for people to act rationally.
You think that taking away people's freedoms will make them act rationally?
I mean, maybe. At some point, are we willing to forfeit some of our individual freedoms to create a habitable world for the future?
Guys, I think George might be onto something. Like, humankind has shown us time and time again that they fundamentally lack the ability to act rationally. I think it may be that in order to sustain a habitable world, we have to minimize people's access to their own capacity to destroy.
I think that's just code for taking away people's liberties.
Yeah, but think about it. When coronavirus hit China, the government had the power to keep people from spreading the disease, and they were able to return to normal life faster than any nation so far. Central authority could be the key to tackling any issue with the global scope of coronavirus or climate change. In the absence of a regulating force, humans are prone to disagree and compete with one another over resources and power. That's why government comes about in the first place. Whether the initiative comes from a government or another unifying belief system, the ability to promote a single path results in more efficiency than systems with multiple competing interests.
In a perfect world where people do act rationally, everyone would stay inside for 2 weeks and everyone's life could be brought back to normal. As we've seen now, that's just not what people do. And it isn't just our desires that keep us from acting rationally, it's that we literally convince ourselves that what is objectively irrational is rational and necessary. Like, do people need to go to the grocery store to get more flour so they can bake to entertain themselves? No, but our boredom alone convinces us that it's worth the risk. And boredom has, like, the least stakes of any emotion. So imagine how easy it is to convince yourself that something more important is worth ignoring long-term consequences.
But who's going to hold this hypothetical government to any moral standard? What you're arguing for isn't sustainability. It's something to comply with and erase your personal fault in our destruction of the world. Democracy is the only system that self-critique can come out of. Who's to say that this government wouldn't decide that their interests don't align with sustainable practices, and suddenly everyone is complacent in a system that is on track to destroy itself within 5 years?
What I'm saying is that centralized government may be the organizing factor that forces people into behaving responsibly. When we think subjectively and are left to think of ourselves as individual entities that are free to act as we desire, we're unable to see the long-term or universal effects of our actions. We're too selfish to behave in a way that recognizes our obligation to the future, so we act on our desires and then justify it as the product of our right to live freely. We're not free as individuals when our freedoms deprive others of a right to live.
I'm not suggesting that we're given free rein to destroy as we please, just that we can't expect any government to regulate our ability to destroy. We need a ruling class that is self-disciplining and looks out for the greater good, rather than their own electability or reputation. I don't think civilization itself needs to be an issue, but rather how we perceive a civilization and what we use as a measure for its success. Plato's ideas for a philosopher king is pretty interesting. Maybe having a person who can serve as an example for other people could be useful. But I also think that if we really want to be sustainable, it will come down to each person on their own making the correct choices.
Guys are missing the point. This isn't about government. George and Jocelyn, you can't argue that people are too irrational for democracy to be sustainable, and then assume that those who are appointed to dictate entire societies will all of a sudden be enlightened, moral, rational creatures. We can't solve the climate crisis by expecting people to act against their nature, but what we can do is expect them to act on the good parts of it.
Okay, but I mean, returning to the question, like, what makes people act according to what they know?
I think it may be that in order for people to act on what they know has to be informed and in line with what they desire.
I think that people do desire a habitable world.
Sure, but that doesn't mean they desire the lifestyle that makes that world possible. See what I mean? There has to be some sort of alignment between our desire and our behavior. Otherwise, there's no reason to sustain a world that we are miserable sustaining. Within New England, one can examine the population decline to near extinction of the peregrine falcons in the 1950s, directly caused by DDT usage, and the subsequent repopulation effort in Massachusetts as a case study illustrating DDT's profound ecological danger. The repopulation of the falcons speaks to the success of 1970s conservation legislation, primarily the Endangered Species Act of 1973. This change in American policy came in part from the publication and subsequent public outcry after Rachel Carson's Silent Spring caught America's attention. The usage of DDT in the first place can be credited for a systemic goal impacting individual action. The government having excess nitrogen after World War II played into the augmentation of the American lawn ideal, which in turn led to increased fertilizer and pesticide use, and environmental problems still at play today. What this ultimately means is that we can't trust figures of authority to solve our sustainability crisis, or anything for that matter. We can't take the easy way out of our own obligations to act with discipline.
But Rachel, the only reason an entire book was written about individual action is that it was an exception to the rule being that people don't act individually. Not to mention, even considering the effect of individual action, it was figures of authority that ultimately passed the legislation.
People don't act individually because we've been trained to believe that our actions don't matter in the grand scheme of the world, that we have to be complacent or act in groups in order to make any real change, which is only bolstered under your suggestion of an authoritarian government. It doesn't seem like rocket science that when people are discouraged from acting individually, they don't take initiative.
So what do you think is the solution to this?
Well, we destroy nature in order to build civilizations and then use our civilizations as a justification for further destruction. So maybe the problem is civilization. With every gain in civilization and technology, we grow further from where nature intends us to be. But all civilization does is cause us to become complacent. We're focused too much on the material objects. We need to get back to nature and stop being so lethargic, vain, greedy, wasteful. What is rational about destroying our world to prove our capacity to advance in it? We can't count on the status quo to fix the status quo. We need to reject society and go back to nature. Look at the mouse. He doesn't have sprawling cities or technology. He doesn't need those external pleasures. He just is. And because of that, he doesn't wonder where he'll sleep at night. That's what the coronavirus and climate change needs to make us do. It is hardship, and that should teach us to become morally and practically better people. We need to use the suffering of this pandemic to train ourselves to become stronger people, mentally and physically. We need to reject society and go back into nature, just like the mouse. By rejecting society, though, we have to become more self-reliant and introspective in order to develop a sense of morality that hasn't been superimposed on us by our social contracts.
But Livy, that's exactly what I'm saying. When we're free to act as we please, we don't have any unifying force that allows us to be collectively productive or forces us to act in a way that's adherent to any sort of moral right.
But why can't we all be individually productive?
Because we can't guarantee that everyone will act according to what they know should be done.
But how can we rely on government officials to act on what they know?
Well, now we're just talking in circles.
Obviously, there aren't any perfect solutions to these questions. These are all questions humanity will struggle with. There isn't one answer. And that's why conversations like this are important.
And then can you edit in me hanging up on every.
All right. Do you want to redo it?
I have a class.
You have a class now?
Yeah.
I think we should just keep it.